Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before starting, I would like to make a legal statement. All statements expressed by Getulio Vargas Foundation's employees and guests in our online events and broadcasts exclusively represent their opinions and not necessarily FGV's institutional position. We also reiterate that everyone present here agreed to participate in this event of their own free will, and they consented to be recorded in this broadcast, which will be posted later on FGV official channels. My name is Mariana Trigo. I am a journalist at FGV International Intelligence Unit. We are pleased to hold this webinar about Japan, and we are privileged to have His Excellency, the Ambassador of Japan, Akira Yamada. During 2021, the FGV International Intelligence Unit, we carry out the Focus on Asia project, a series of webinars with representatives from several Asian countries participating in thematic webinars that will have the objective of mapping, debating, and explaining why Asia is today the world's main geoeconomic axis. Before talking to the ambassador, I would like to introduce Professor Renato, the director of the FGV International Intelligence Unit and professor at the Graduate School of Economics here at FGV. Before we ask our first question, Professor, would you like to join me in welcoming our guest, the ambassador?
Thank you very much, Mariana. Good afternoon to everybody. And first and foremost, I would like to deeply thank the Honorable Ambassador Yamada in the name of FGV-IIU and in the name of our President, Professor Carlos Ivan Simonsen Leal. Thank you very much, Honorable Ambassador. It's a great honor for us to have you here. Japan is, for all Brazilians, and for us in particular at FGV, is a great friend, and we have several collaborations and joint projects, and we've entertained plenty of seminars and conferences with our Japanese friends, especially those at the embassy and the consulates in Rio, São Paulo, and Belo Horizonte. So it's a great honor for us. Thank you very much once again, Ambassador. I would like to compliment also what Mariana has said. FGV-IIU is a very small think tank, and we try to focus on specific and key issues in international relations, which we find important for Brazil. There's no need to emphasize the importance of Asia for our country and for the world in general. To the surprise, nowadays, I would say a few, to the chagrin of some of our European friends, the center of the world is not in the Atlantic anymore, but it is in the Pacific. And we must learn, we must understand the dynamic which is taking place in the Pacific. To understand the dynamic, we must, there is a fire brigade behind us.
That's okay, Professor.
The advantages and the problems of webinars. Okay, thank you. Sorry for this nuisance. But I would say that to understand the dynamic, we must understand the actors. And the actors in the Asian scenario are numerous. But of course, some are more important than others. In our project, we have insisted on not skewing China, not avoiding China, but calling attention that to understand Asia, one must understand all countries in that continent. And within this context, needless to say, Japan is a most important actor. A model democracy, model and modern, still a very competitive and important economy, a master in technology in many sectors, one of the biggest, I would say perhaps one of the two biggest financial powers in the world. Still, people forget the spread of the Japanese financial system, and with a delicate, if the Honorable Ambassador allows me, a ticklish position. Japan is in the middle of the hurricane. So Japan is a strategic actor in the South China Sea, in the Asian drama. So it's very important to understand and to talk and to try to grasp how the Japanese see their position, their problems, and their future. So this is part of the first objective of our project. The project will focus on Asia. We'll have a follow-up in which we are going to deal with more specific subjects. In this first phase of the project, which ends at the end of this year, we are trying to draw a broad picture of the key actors in Asia. Japan, beyond being an important actor, for us is very important because Japan is an old partner of Brazil. We have a Japanese diaspora, Japanese immigration, which has contributed to our economy, to our agriculture, to our culture. In São Paulo, for instance, in Minas Gerais, in the south, there is a strong Japanese community nowadays represented by grandsons, great-grandsons, sons, but the ties are very strong. So besides the economic and strategic and political ties, there is also a very strong cultural bond. That's why we praise so much to have one session fully dedicated to Japan. And that's why, once again, before passing the word to Mariana and to our Honorable Ambassador, I would like to say, muito obrigado, arigato, Ambassador, and we hope to have a very entertaining and profitable discussion. Thank you.
Ambassador Akira, we are very honored to have you at FGV. Please allow me to share a brief overview of your professional journey. The ambassador's diplomatic career is very extensive and began in 1981. In recent years, the ambassador has been Deputy Chief Minister of Mission at the Japanese Embassy in the Republic of Iraq, Deputy Chief Minister of the Mission of the Japanese Embassy in Spain, Director General of the Office of Latin America and Caribbean Affairs, and Japanese Ambassador to Mexico. Thank you, Ambassador. Despite Japan being inhabited for at least 10,000 years, the Portuguese, once colonizers of Brazil, were also the first Europeans to arrive in Japan in 1543. Therefore, a connection was commenced between our two countries. The diplomatic relationship Brazil holds with Japan is one of Brazil's oldest, having begun back in 1895. In that year, the Treaty of Friendship, Commerce, and Navigation was signed. Recently, according to the BBC survey, 71% of Brazilians saw Japan's influence in the country as a positive one. Thus, let's start our discussion by talking about the modern-day relationship between our two countries. Ambassador, how do you view the influence of Japan in Brazil and the strong partnership between the two countries?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to this FGV webinar. It's for me a great honor to be able to participate in the FGV webinar. FGV is a very prestigious institution in Brazil. Well, as ambassador, I have been working in Brazil for 4 years and 2 months, but my relationship with Brazil began much earlier. In 1976, before entering foreign ministry, I visited Brazil for the first time. Well, as you said, Japan and Brazil established diplomatic relations in 1885 and have had a long history of friendship and cooperation since then. But Japanese immigration to Brazil began in 1908. Currently, there are about 2 million Nikkei. Nikkei is a descendant of Japanese immigrants living in Brazil. This is the largest community of Nikkei outside Japan. On the other hand, Japan is home to about 210,000 Brazilians, making with Brazil third largest Paraguay. Thus, although the two countries are geographically far apart, there are strong human ties. Japanese immigrants have experienced many hardships and difficulties since their immigration, but they have worked diligently in Brazil, gained the trust of Brazilian society, and contributed greatly to the development of Brazil. Today, they play a very important role in diffusing Japanese culture, Japanese values to Brazil, and they are, in a sense, a bridge of friendship between Japan and Brazil. In addition, there is a long history of economic cooperation between Japan and Brazil. In the latter half of the 20th century, Japan implemented a number of so-called national projects in Brazil, which are supported by both the Japanese government and the Japanese private sector. These include the Ujimina Steel Mill Project, the Senibra Pulp and Paper Mill Project, the development of the Carajás Iron Mine, and Amazon Aluminium. In particular, I'd like you to know the importance of a Producer, Proyecto de Desarrollo Agrícola do Cerrado. Producer has transformed from a barren land into one of the world's leading rich agricultural production areas, and has made Brazil the world's largest exporter of soybeans, making Brazil one of the world's leading agricultural powers. Producer is a major project that should be recorded in the world's agriculture history for its scale and for its impact. Producer is a symbolic success of Japan-Brazil cooperation, of which both Japanese and Brazilians can be proud. We'll talk more about today's economic relations later, but on the other hand, Japan and Brazil are strategic global partners that share fundamental values such as freedom and democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights. As strategic global partners, Japan and Brazil cooperate in a wide range of areas, not only in the bilateral context, but also in the international international arena, including Security Council reform of the United Nations, WTO reform, and the resolution of global issues such as climate change and the achievement of the SDGs, etc. Such cooperation will be strengthened further in the future.
Thank you, Ambassador. Japan is currently one of the world leaders in developing new technologies, helping to protect the environment. For example, the advanced technology of hybrid vehicles manufactured by Honda and Toyota, as well as the use of biofuels. The country has been committed to reducing carbon rates since it hosted the Kyoto Protocol, and has shown real leadership to reducing deforestation and environmental degradation outside of Japan. Additionally, you continue to donate with other allied countries billions of dollars to combat deforestation in several countries. What is the current long-term view of Japan in contributing towards the preservation of the environment in other countries? May we ask which countries are you currently assisting and what are Japan's goals for the coming years in this sector?
All right. Japan's cooperation and the contribution to global environmental issues covers many fields, but let's focus on the issue of climate change. By the way, one of the Nobel Prize laureates in physics announced this week was Dr. Manabe of Japan for his research on the mechanism of climate change. Japan has been actively working on the issue of climate change for many years. I myself served as a climate change negotiator. At the Climate Change Summit in April this year, Japan made the following announcement. Consistent with the 2050 carbon neutrality goal, and as an ambitious target, Japan aimed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 46% from fiscal year 2013 levels in 2030. In terms of support, Japan is providing a total of about 1.3 trillion yen, or about 11 billion US dollars per year in public and private support from 2016 to 2020, and will continue to provide the same high level of support from 2021 to 2025, which is the largest commitment among developed countries. In this context, Japan has also pledged to contribute up to a total of $3 billion to the Green Climate Fund. We will support the world decarbonization transition by making maximum use of Japan's technologies, such as energy conservation, hydrogen, and CCS, carbon dioxide capture and storage. In addition, Japan will promote international cooperation to help vulnerable countries adapt to the impact of climate change. Japan's support is not limited to a few countries. Japan will provide a variety of assistance to all developing countries that are actively working to combat climate change, tailored to the circumstances of each country. In addition to climate change issues, Japan is providing assistance to developing countries on various environmental issues, such as biodiversity, marine plastic waste problem, air pollution, and water pollution, etc. Addressing environmental issues is an important pillar of Japan's ODA policy. So I can say that in Japan, both the government and the private sector are making much effort to achieve this carbon neutrality in the future, also to contribute to this environmental protection, not only of Japan, but also this entire world.
Thank you for your explanation, Ambassador. And after World War II, Japan's diplomatic policy was based on a close partnership with the US, with an emphasis on international cooperation. The US is Japan's biggest military partner through its foreign policy and the Japan-US Defensive Alliance. Japan's military expenditures are the sixth largest in the world. Its biggest disputes involve natural resources, such as oil in neighboring countries, such as Russia, China, Taiwan, and South Korea. 2 weeks ago, the President of the United States strengthened its alliance with Japan, India, and Australia to contain the advance of China in the Indo-Pacific through the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. What are the impacts and consequences of the stronger alliance between the 4 countries, please?
Yes, the United States is Japan's most important ally, and Japan-US alliance is the cornerstone of Japanese diplomacy. Japan has been advocating the free and open Indo-Pacific vision based on the rules in accordance with international law. Together with Japan, United States, Australia, and India are committed to strengthening a free and open international order based on shared fundamental values and the rule of law. The second Quad leaders meeting in September 24th, held face-to-face for the first time, demonstrated the strong unity of the 4 countries, and they reaffirmed their commitment to work towards the free and open Indo-Pacific for the security and prosperity of the region. The meeting discussed not only security-related issues, but also cooperation in a wide range of areas, including the COVID-19 vaccines, climate change, technology and innovation, space, cyber, etc. They also agreed to hold the Quad Summit meeting every year from now on. Quad's vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific is open to countries that share the fundamental values of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. I think that Indo-Pacific Ocean will be safer and more prosperous if Quad deepens its cooperation in various fields and works with many other countries that share its fundamental values. Japan and Brazil also share the fundamental values of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and the respect for human rights. And this is extremely important. Sharing these fundamental values, we can actively cooperate to create a better, safer, and more prosperous international society, even though we are far apart in distance.
Could I intervene and profit from this statement from the Honorable Ambassador to add a question regarding a very recent issue, Ambassador. We all have followed the creation of AUKUS, which is this agreement between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US. Of course, there are different readings of this agreement. The narrative exposed by the 3 members is that it is a broad cooperation agreement, which has as one of its objectives to counter or to hedge Chinese expansion in the area. Of course, the Chinese have another different reading, and different Asian countries have the different readings. I would like to ask you 2 questions. What, in your opinion, would be the impact of the AUKUS agreement on Japan? Of course, given that you are together, as Mariana and you yourself mentioned, you are together in the Quad, maybe the Quad will be a complementary or an additional or a second or a first discussion forum together with AUKUS. So The US is in the Quad, Australia is in the Quad, Japan is in the Quad together with India. My first question, anyhow, would be if you could elaborate a bit. What are the consequences of AUKUS for Japan? Will Japan want to have a similar initiative or to change or reinforce some of the lines it's been conducting in the area? The second question is the following. We know that AUKUS created a kind of uncomfortable situation with the European Union. This is also a debatable point because one could ask, why should France by itself want to have a foothold in the Pacific alone without the support or without taking together the whole European Union? There is a lot of debate on this. But anyhow, France did this move and they felt hurt by the way AUKUS was created because nobody told them, they were told afterwards. And it's true that a very attractive contract was cut. So given that Japan has also very good relationships with the European Union, what is your view? Is Japan planning to do something in terms of helping AUKUS and Quad members to mend fences with the European Union? How do you see this now as related to your relationship with European Union?
Well, I think it is a very natural movement that AUKUS strengthening its relationship and cooperation. Japan is already strengthening our cooperation, not only in political or economic field, but also in the security field, the cooperation with Australia. Australia is a very important partner in the Asian Pacific. If we also share the common values, common fundamental values. And as for the relationship with the AUKUS and France, AUKUS and the European Unions, I am not so worried about the situation. Well, naturally, these submarine issues is, I think, rather individual problems because of these problems in the contract of the between France and Australia. I understand Australia reviewed their decision. It does not mean, I don't think it is detrimental for the relationship between AUKUS and the European Union. Well, and Japan will welcome the commitment of European countries in the Asian region, as well as the Indo-Pacific region. France and United Kingdom has their own territory in the Pacific Ocean, so they are natural player in this Indo-Pacific region. And UK, France, and other European countries also they share the common value of the freedom, democracy, and rule of law. So we can strengthen these cooperation with UK, with other European countries, including France, not only in the economic field, but our political field, but also security issues as well. So, well, it is not necessary for Japan to intermediate between AUKUS and the European Union. Well, so I'm not so worried about the current problem on the nuclear submarine issues between Australia and France. Well, I understand. I think that they themselves resolve this problem in a reasonable manner.
Ambassador, former Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida has just become Prime Minister of Japan after being elected president of the Liberal Democratic Party. What are the likely changes your country expects after the election of the current Prime Minister?
Yes, former Minister of Foreign Affairs Fumio Kishida became the 100th Prime Minister of Japan on October 4th this Monday.
Yes.
I know Prime Minister Kishida well. I accompanied him on, for example, on his visit to Brazil in 2013 as the Director General of the Latin American and Caribbean Affairs Bureau. So this is my very completely personal comments, but Prime Minister Kishida as a politician of great character and insight. So I'm delighted to see him take office. In his inaugural press conference, Prime Minister Kishida positioned COVID-19 issue, economic policy, foreign policy, and national security as the three pillars of his important policies. As for first, COVID-19, and third, foreign policy and security, I believe that the current policies of the government will be continued and further strengthened. As for these, regarding the economic policy, Prime Minister Kishida emphasized the realization of a virtuous cycle of growth and distribution. As a growth strategy, he cited the promotion of science and technology, digitalization, and emphasis on economic security. While as a distribution strategy, he mentioned the expansion of the middle class, strengthening the function of the distribution to working people. However, I think it is still a little early to say what kind of changes are expected, because the general election of the House of Representatives will be held this month on October 30. And depending on the result, the Diet will appoint a new Prime Minister. So depending on the outcome of the election, many changes can occur. I will refrain from making prediction for my own country's election, but most experts seem to expect that the Kishida administration will continue after the election. So in order to see what kind of new things, what kind of change takes place, we can wait for this result of the election.
Thank you, Ambassador. Recently, some officials at the Central Bank of Japan warned of a relative delay in the country's post-pandemic economic recovery. What are your forecasts towards the recovery of the Japanese economy?
Certainly, the Japanese economy continues to face a difficult situation due to COVID-19. But there is a movement toward recovery. But the tempo of recovery seems to be slowing down somewhat. However, in Japan, vaccinations are progressing rapidly, and the COVID-19 emergency declarations that were issued in various parts of Japan were lifted at the end of September, 30th of September. I expect the economy to improve in the future due to the effects of various economic measures and the improvement of overseas economies. The vaccination rate in Japan as of October 4th is 72% for the first dose and 62% for the second dose. After the statements by the Bank of Japan officials mentioned in the question, in late September, Bank of Japan Governor Kuroda stated that as the vaccine uptake rate increases, it will become easier to both control infection and to consume, and consumer spending will pick up. I agree with this view. In other words, I think that Japanese economy will be recovering in the near future.
Okay, Ambassador Akira, last month recently, Japan's Ministry of Health reported the country had reached a new record for the number of senior citizens over 100 years of age. This number is 5 times higher than in 2000. Senior citizens make up 28% of the Japanese population. An aging population presents an economic challenge for several countries as it results in a reduced workforce. With the increase of your elderly and the reduction in birth rates, what economic measures are Japan considering adopting? And what could an aging population in Japan teach Brazil too?
Well, Japan has the longest life expectancy in the world, and that in itself is something to be proud of. However, at the same time, Japan is also the world's most aged country, and Japan is facing various challenges associated with an aging society. I believe that by providing solutions to these challenges, Japan will be able to show a good model for an aging society to the world. Japan is pursuing a society in which people of all ages can play an active role according to their wishes, building a foundation for life and community in the region, and using technological innovation to counter the aging of society. As for the labor shortage, we can think of improving the environment to realize a society where these elderly can work, say, agelessly. I believe that we should use science and technology to deal with this challenge, especially robotics, AI technology, and ITC technology to confront the challenge of an aging society. The application of this technology to the real world in Japan is one of the most advanced level in the world. However, I believe that further application, further advancement are possible. And apart from the aging society, I believe that the declining birth rate itself is Japan's biggest challenge. It will be necessary for not only the government, but the whole society to devote more and more resources to create an environment where children can be raised easily. So I think that we can provide more resources for these parents who care these young kids, education, welfare, and so on. And I wonder what Japan can teach or tell Brazil. Important thing that you should prepare as early as possible. Aging society can come much faster than you expect. So because if the living condition and health condition in Brazil getting better, then that your society will be aging. You like what you don't like. So prepare as fast, as early as possible. This is probably the advice from Japan.
Ambassador, first of all, thank you very much for your last wise words. I fully agree with you. But it's still discussing the domestic realm. And of course, we wish Prime Minister Kishida lots of good luck and a great success. It's important for us that the economy, that Japan's economy thrives and grows and, well, is in very good shape. I would like to ask you a broad question, maybe drawing on your personal knowledge of the Prime Minister. We know that Japanese economy is still coping with a kind of stagnation. No, there is a target of a 2% inflation this year, which doesn't seem to be reached. The economy is not dead, but it's reacting very slowly. This, at the beginning of this week, the international press today was talking, and we know, of course, that the press wants to heighten news which are more sensational. They were talking today, even the Financial Times, of the China Shoku, that the stock market reacted negatively to statements from the minister. They expected him to have a different role as relates to stock market, and apparently the minister didn't match expectations. So, but this is not my point. My point, as I said, is a broader question in terms of let us hope that Prime Minister Kishida continues after the end of October. I fully agree with you, and I think he will continue. I'm not an expert in Japanese politics, but I agree with you. What is your feeling regarding his economic policy? Because many analysts are saying that at the end of the day, Prime Minister Kishida will follow Prime Minister Abe's economic policy. Do you think that it will be broadly very similar to Minister Shinzo Abe's Abenomics, or you think that Mr. Kishida, you mentioned, for instance, some reforms. You think that Mr. Kishida, of course, after the October elections, if he continues, will intend to go set himself a bit apart from Prime Minister Abe's economic policy? What's your feeling? I know that this is a very, it's an uncertain question, but given that you know him quite well, what's your feeling in terms of to orient us? What do you think?
Well, since Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Suga and Prime Minister Kishida, all of them are Liberal Democrat Party leaders.
Yeah.
So there are some continuity or similarity in their policy, including their economic policy. But there are always, when the new Prime Minister started the administration, there will be some changes. And for example, this Prime Minister Kishida addressed these distribution issues. Well, in Japan, the many opposition parties highlighted distribution policy. So the Prime Minister Kishida, I'm thinking that he's trying to include even the good part of this policy of the opposition parties. And also his political style is a little bit different from this Prime Minister Suga or Prime Minister Abe. Well, he himself, and in the press conference, his good point is that he is hearing very carefully of the opinion of the other persons. It is true. Even though he has a very strong commitment, a strong opinion of himself, however, he is very ready to listen to these opinions of other person, even that these opinions are contrary to his own opinion. So, well, frankly speaking, it is well, just only 2 days ago, the government, Kishida government started. So I myself, I don't know what will be the shape of this Kishida government's economic policy. Just I've learned from this, his press conference and his nomination of the new cabinet. But well, I think first there are naturally the continuity in the policy of the above all these diplomatic and security-related issues. As for economy, there is a continuity, but also this Prime Minister Kishida apparently to poor resources for this distribution policy.
Thank you.
Naturally, as for the growth strategy, as I said, the science and technology will be given much priority, much resources in his cabinet.
That's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Japan recently hosted the Olympics. What legacy did the 2021 Olympics provide, and how did it impact the economy, specifically in the tourism and services sectors?
The Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games were held at the time when Japan and the world was still in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Before the Games were held, in Japan, there are many people who wondered if the Olympics could really be held. But the Japanese government and the organizing committee for the Olympic and Paralympic Games, they are very much committed to organize, and they and many other concerned parties worked very hard to welcome athletes from all over the world. And I believe that we are able to hold the games successfully. Although most of the events were unattended without public, athletes from around the world gave their best performance and impressed those of us who watched them on TV. I myself watched the Olympic and Paralympic Games until the midnight or from the early morning in Brazil. And both Brazil and Japan set a new Olympic and Paralympic records for the number of the medals won. And I believe that this was a good event. These are good events for both Japan and Brazil. After the Olympics, the public opinion in Japan has changed. And now the majority of people are now saying that they are glad that Olympics were held. It was good that Olympics were held. I have heard the efforts made by the Japanese officials and the organization committee. I have the friends in the governments and the organization committees, and they say that there are many, many difficulties in organizing the games, such as the thorough implementation of infection prevention measures. By overcoming these difficulties and hosting the games, we can say Japan have fulfilled its international responsibility. Through the Olympic and the Paralympic Games, Japan has promoted the realization of an inclusive society, the management of the games in consideration of sustainability, the recovery from the Great East Earthquake, Japan earthquake, and the appeal of Japanese technology, culture, and food. We believe that the result of these efforts will remain as the legacy of the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. In addition, we are able to present a model to the international community for hosting a large-scale international event during a pandemic. But the most important legacy, in my opinion, is the idea that we can overcome difficulties. On the other hand, unfortunately, since the event was held without spectators, without public, I think the impact on the economy and tourism was small, or rather limited. During the Olympic Games, these almost no foreign tourists could come to Japan. But in the future, I think these tourism to Japan will recover, and these I understand many of the foreign people saw these some attraction of Japan through the TV screen while they are watching the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games.
Thank you. In 2020, Japan was ranked as the 60th largest country in the Brazilian export market. Brazil exports to Japan products such as iron ore, corn, mutant poultry, coffee, and aluminium. When comparing 2020 to 2021, Japan showed a decrease in these imports. How can we increase exports to Japan and encourage Brazilian companies to import more products from your country? What alternatives does Japan have to leverage trade relations and the growth of exports of products such as automobiles, electronics, and computer products?
Well, according to the statistics of the Brazilian Ministry of Economy, export to Japan from Brazil in 2020 is $4.13 billion, and imports from Japan is $4.19 billion, almost balanced. Trade between Japan and Brazil has been stagnant in recent years. The decline in trade with Japan in 2020 and 2021 is, of course, largely due to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. But if the economies of both Japan and Brazil pick up, it is safe to assume that trade will start to expand in 2022. Regarding the expansion of exports to Japan, for example, Japanese food market is huge and open, but at the same time, competition is extremely fierce, and Japanese consumers are probably the most demanding in the world. They focus on overall quality, not only price and taste, but also product safety, hygiene, packaging, and the story behind the product, etc. In return, they or we will pay a higher price for products if they are convinced of the quality. In order to be successful in the Japanese market, it is essential to study and analyze the characteristic of the Japanese market well. In order to make it easier for Japanese products to be exported to Brazil, I think it is important to improve the business environment, for example, by simplifying the tax system and optimizing customs clearance procedures, etc. However, the strong recovery of Brazilian economy is the most important factor for the increase of Japanese export to Brazil. So I'm very much looking forward to the strong recovery of the Brazilian economy.
Okay, Ambassador. A study by the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Brazil shows that 30% of Japanese companies intend to increase investments in Brazilian startups. It also reported 55% of Japanese multinational companies located in Brazil intend to maintain a similar level of investment with Brazil after the pandemic. Ambassador, please tell us about Japan's investment plans in Brazil and how we can further strengthen the investment partnership between the two countries.
Japanese companies have made large-scale investments in Brazil since the 1960s. Today, I first gave the example of national project as an example of the Japan's cooperation with Brazil. And it can be said that the activities of Japanese companies have greatly contributed to the Brazil economic development. The number of Japanese companies operating in Brazil has leveled off at around 700 since 2013, but is expected to be 656 in 2020. In 2020, direct investment by Japanese companies in Brazil was about $2 billion, which is about 6% of total foreign investment in Brazil. In the midst of pandemic, new investment has been difficult, but many Japanese companies continue to value Brazil's potential and remain committed to the Brazilian market. In recent years, Toyota has invested in the new Sorocaba plant in 2019 and Nissan is promoting a biofuel cell vehicles. SoftBank Vision Fund, a Japanese investment firm, has been investing in Brazilian companies and plans to expand its business by setting aside $5 billion for Latin American investments. In order for Japanese companies to expand their investment in Brazil, first of all, it is important for the Brazilian economy to recover, but at the same time, it is essential to improve the business environment, such as reducing so-called Brazilian cost, and protecting the intellectual property rights, etc. I appreciate the Brazilian government's efforts in recent years to promote structural reforms and improve the business environment. But I look forward to further reforms. Well, I talk with officials of the Brazilian government, and I always say to my Japanese friends, the current Brazilian government is the most business-friendly government in these 40 years. But I hope that is a structural reform, the improvement of business environment in Brazil, continue and to advance even more. And there are various schemes for dialogues between Japan and Brazil at various levels in the public and private sectors. And I'd like to utilize this opportunity to encourage the improvement of the business environment in Brazil. In these years, because of the pandemic, the face-to-face by dialogue were difficult. However, some meetings was held on online. So, for example, this last month we had the so-called Japan-Brazil Wise Men Group meeting, and next month we will have this Japan-Brazil Economic Cooperation meeting between the K-Landen and the CNI. And there are many other schemes and opportunity of the dialogue. And for a medium to long-term perspective, there is a room for big room for Japanese investment in Brazil to grow significantly. I myself, as well as a Japanese businessman stationed in Brazil, are well aware of Brazil's potential. I hope that Brazil itself will continue to promote structural reforms so that it can realize its full potential. And on the other hand, as I said, I myself and Japanese businessmen stationed in Brazil understand the Brazil's potentials, but the Brazilian images, Brazilian news in the international press is not so optimistic or promising if we compare to the reality of Brazil. I think but is a businessman out of Brazil depend on the news from Brazil, international media, and relatively bad news runs very quickly, and the good news and potential of Brazil are not always well published, well informed to these people out of Brazil. So improving the image, what is just demonstrates the real shape of the Brazil and Brazilian economy is very important to increase investment in Brazil, not only from Japan, but also from other countries as well.
Professor, would you like to offer some concluding comments?
Yes. First, to thank the ambassador for his remarks and his good wishes for our economy and for the country in general. It's true that there is, unfortunately, sometimes there is a bias in the international press, a negative bias, I would say, towards Brazil. But this is part of the vagaries of the system. You know that we are optimists, and I think these are periods, and the situation in terms of news will improve. Of course, we have a lot of homework to do, as the ambassador kindly pointed out. I would like to single out two issues regarding our cooperation, which I think are very interesting, and the ambassador directly or indirectly touch both. The first is the area of small and medium enterprises. I remember that in one of my visits to Japan, I visit quite a few very small industries. One was a small metallurgy at the back of the house where the owner lived. But this man, he performed very specific and fine metallurgy, very specific things for the car industry and for the health industry, syringes, things like this. It's very, very specific, with a very high value added, and it was a very small industry. So I think there is the ambassador mentioned the business environment. We have to make entrepreneurs, put entrepreneurs together and exchange experiences. I think this is an area where we could profit a lot from Brazil. I know there are ties, particularly because of the diaspora. But I think this is an area that could be increased if the ambassador agrees with me, because we can learn and we can profit, and it would be interesting for our Japanese partners also. Another area regarding cooperation, and this is broad international cooperation. The ambassador in his opening speech mentioned the Cerrado project. This is a model cooperation, and we did quite a few cooperations with international cooperation agents in Japan regarding the improvement, development, or technology transfer in agriculture, even Brazil and Japan together acting in third countries. This was a very interesting practice, which lasted for some time. Of course, we know governments change. There was one project in which locally in Africa there were political problems. This happens. This is everything is normal. But unfortunately, I think that this drive slowed down a bit. So I would like to ask the ambassador, this is my second question, if there is still there is still the desire in Japan to reignite this kind of partnerships in which Japan comes with the money and a specific expertise, and we come with another expertise, for instance, tropical agriculture or things like that, and we together develop cooperation projects in third countries. I think this is a very interesting kind of activity, and I would like to hear the ambassador, how is the mood nowadays in Japan towards this? For instance, if Brazil, because I think that the lack of interest, of enthusiasm, decreased from both sides. But if Brazil, let us say, wants to come back with these initiatives, would Japan be willing to also? What is the mood? How do you think would be the perspectives from the Japanese side?
Well, let me answer from this second question. As for these so-called triangular cooperation, Japan, Brazil, and the third countries.
Yes.
We are still promoting this kind of cooperation, for example, in the community police cooperation. Japan has been cooperating for many years with Brazil, and now these policemen from the Central American countries come to Brazil to have this training course in Brazil by these Brazilian policemen who are trained in Japan and in the Japanese corporation. And the other, the health and health area as well. We are promoting the various such cooperation, the triangular cooperation. As for this triangular cooperation of this tropical agriculture or savanna agriculture, as you mentioned, we had cooperation with African countries for many years. But there was, even though Japan put out a lot of energy and resources for that project, but apparently it is not, I'd like to be very frank, it did not produce expected result. And Brazil, well, withdraw from the rather earlier stage. Well, so even though there are very strong political will that we would like to cooperate, Japan, Brazil, and for the third countries. But it is very important to this strong commitment of the three countries, Japan and Brazil and the third countries. Well, in the case of the bilateral cooperation, if Japan and the recipient country, or if Japan and Brazil has a strong commitment, that's well, we can do very well. But in the case of triangular cooperation, we should count on the commitment of the three countries. So it is the idea of the triangular cooperation is very good. Japan has been promoting these triangular cooperations in the OECD DAC or many international fora that let's promote this type of triangular cooperation. However, these carrying out on the ground, it is very difficult. But I'm a very Japan is a very positive to promote such a triangular cooperation if there is a strong commitment from the third country as well as this Brazil. So naturally, if you Brazil would like to promote this triangular cooperation, Brazil also has to provide some financial resources. Even though Japan covers important part of these financial resources, but also Brazil should provide human resources and financial resources. So it is depend on this will and this capacity of the Brazilian governments. Well, the idea itself, everybody like it, the triangular cooperation.
But I'd like to thank the ambassador for his willing participation. We have most definitely gained much in the way of knowledge and understanding of your country for your comments. Please accept our warmest thanks. I would also like to offer a special thanks to the professor. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much. I think you've put forward plenty of ideas, and also, which, as you know, for us Brazilians, is very important, plenty of enthusiasm and a positive mood. So we are happy to see that Japan continues to be a reliable partner and a friend. That's very important. And I think that in all these dialogues, we have this kind of dual conversation. There is the domestic front, which is important. That's why we talked about Prime Minister Kishida, and also a bit about the Brazilian environment. You mentioned reforms and things that the Brazilian cost, the famous Brazilian cost, which are important. So there is the domestic front in the two countries, and there is also the foreign side, which is important because Japan's relations in Asia, Brazil relations with the world are important also for even a bilateral partnership. I think that there are many issues that we could go on discussing, but usually we like to frame this dialogue within 1 hour and a quarter, 1 hour and 10 minutes. And I think that it has been very rewarding and very good. So from my side also, and as I said, in the name of our president, thank you very much. And I hope this is the idea of the project. We'll continue this dialogue through different forms. There will be a report. We are going to issue a book on the sessions, and there will be other modalities of continuation for the project. And we count very much, as usual, with the Japanese embassy, the ambassadors and the consuls who have always been very resourceful and very helpful. Thank you very much, Honorable Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I always say the relationship between Japan and Brazil is excellent. However, there is much more room for us to increase, to strengthen our friendship, our cooperation. So these future will be much better than now. But even though in the short term, we are facing difficulties, above all because of the pandemic. But in the long run, I can foresee a lot of the perspectives, positive perspectives in our relationship. So thank you very much for this invitation to webinar. And such a dialogue, such a conversation is also very important for us to strengthen our knowledge and about Japan, about Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Arigato. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado.
Obrigada.